I am chair of Herefordshire for Europe. This is actually a West Midlands event, which we've opened nationally. So it's great to have such a big participation from people all across the country. George Longstaff is one of our two West Midlands representatives on the European Movement National Council with Graham Jones, and he's done all the work to set this evening up and to invite our two guest speakers, Michael Dougan and Mike Galsworthy. I expect many of you will have heard them speak before, but perhaps not at the same event. I'm going to introduce them in just a moment, but before that, I want to say a couple of other things. First, that we should have with us, but I think maybe not in the room yet, Richard Wilson, who is newly elected, well, he was chair before, and he's just been elected again as a chair of Grassroots for Europe. Their elections were last week. He's also a vice chair of the European Movement. The procedure this evening is that I'm going to ask Michael Dougan first to speak for about 20 minutes, up to 20 minutes. He will then take 10 minutes of questions specifically for him. And then Mike Galsworthy for up to 20 minutes and 10 minutes of questions to him. And then we will have an open, when you can ask questions to either of them, more of a kind of a panel discussion for up to about 30 minutes or so, so that we hope to finish by about 8:30 at the latest. I hope that's all right with Michael and with Mike. Now, as I said, you probably have heard them both before and know them quite well, but I will just give a brief introduction as a reminder. Michael Dougan is Professor of European Law and the Jean Monnet Chair in EU Law at the University of Liverpool. He first came to the attention of social media users in the UK when a video of one of his lectures was uploaded to YouTube and other social media platforms, where he dissected the academic validity and honesty of the legal arguments presented by those who are advocating the UK's withdrawal from the European Union in the lead up to the referendum in 2016. It's about a 25-minute long viral clip, and he described there the Leave campaign as, quote, degenerating into dishonesty on an industrial scale, unquote. He's provided written and live expert testimony to the UK Parliament on many occasions, acted as a fact checker for BBC News Reality Check service during the referendum. He's going to share his views on the new EU-UK agreement. Will it be the basis of ongoing consensus or contention as to its interpretation and its implementation? And what are likely to be the key issues and how might they pan out? Mike Galsworthy is co-founder of Scientists for EU and Healthier In, and a media commentator about the effects of Brexit on the scientific community in the UK. Visiting researcher at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, he was previously Senior Research Associate in the Department of Applied Health Research at University College London. Immediately after the referendum, he articulated two concerns that Scientists for EU aimed to address. Quote, first, a lack of clarity and cohesion within the community on EU benefits and Brexit risks. And secondly, a lack of public understanding of the UK-EU relationship in science, unquote. His decision to found the organisation was driven by his reaction to the tone and the content of the Brexit debate, which he described as, quote, a colossal nationwide rejection of expert opinion, unquote, fostered by media focused on the political soap opera, not the facts. And Mike will speak to us about where we are now on Brexit and where we want to get to. How do we get there? And what are the key issues involved, including the likely time frames? I think Mike is the author of the phrase brick by brick approach. So we'll probably hear something about that too. So that's enough from me, more than enough from me. Can I invite Michael to speak to us first?
Thanks very much, of course, for the invitation to be here. So I've been asked to talk about the new trade and cooperation agreement between the EU and the UK. And of course, I'll start with a good lawyer's disclaimer. This is a document which I'm sure some of you might have opened the file and had a quick glance at it. Not many people will want to do more than that. It is absolutely gigantic. It is unbelievably complicated. I read it once. It took me about 4 days, and I will never do it again. That's one of the promises I can make in life. I will never read this awful document ever again in the whole. It covers huge numbers of really specialist fields. that no one can possibly know about in the whole. And often they cross-refer to other entire systems like the WTO, like specialist regimes and international standards and regional and sectoral regimes. And to be frank, I just have no personal or professional interest in things like fishing quotas or road haulage permits and so on. So really, I think all of us are going to approach something as complicated as this with our own perspective, with our own interests. And my interest is as a constitutional lawyer. I'm a sort of systems lawyer. I'm interested in how the big picture fits together. And so I'm going to make some comments about the big picture of EU-UK relations that emerge from this document as a whole, with specific reference to some of the more detailed provisions that are of interest to me, such as free movement of goods and security cooperation. So from a big picture perspective, let's start with the positives, because it is true, of course, that this deal has some positives when compared to having no deal at all, but that's really the comparison by which we can say it has any positives at all. Compared to having nothing, this deal has certain benefits. I've said it in another context, it's better than having a kick in the teeth or a punch in the face. That's what it's better than. But really, it's important to stress that this trade and cooperation agreement doesn't give the UK anything it didn't have already. This is about salvaging little bits and bobs rather than offering anything new or anything that the UK didn't enjoy already. So for example, Boris Johnson keeps going on about how the trade and cooperation agreement guarantees zero tariffs, zero quotas. Well, we had that for decades already. That's nothing new. He keeps going on about how in the field of security, which by the way, the provisions on security are possibly, well, at least as important, if not even more important than the provisions on trade. It's just that we don't hear that much about them. Yes, of course, it's true that the UK will retain certain degrees of security cooperation with the EU in fields like fingerprints and DNA information, things like cross-border judicial surrenders of criminal suspects or criminal convicts. But of course, we had all those for decades. This is nothing new. We had all of these already. Similarly, you know, we could say that it's a good thing that there will still be some form of cross-border emergency healthcare if we're on holiday and we have an accident and we need medical treatment. It's a good thing, of course, that there will still be a system of social security cover for emergencies, but it's not as good as what we had already, and it doesn't cover as many countries as it did before. It's also a good thing, I suppose, that the EU will almost de facto act as an external guarantor of basic standards of social protection for the UK in fields like labour rights or environmental protection or consumer rights. In other words, the EU can use the threat of retaliatory sanctions or disruption to economic relations if the UK government tries to undermine in a serious way our rights as UK citizens. But of course, again, that's not quite as good as actually being a positive and active member of the club that formulates these rules and policies in the first place. So yes, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, limited partial preservation of certain previous benefits associated with membership of the EU. But of course, far more important than what the treaty offers is what the treaty doesn't offer. Compared to no deal, it's better than a kick in the face, but compared to EU membership, compared to life up until the 31st of December 2020, this deal is, of course, a thin, pale shadow. And in many situations, it's totally worthless. It's totally worthless. There may as well be no deal at all. And I'll just illustrate that with some examples. The first one, I suppose, is the zero tariff, zero quota, the big headline trade guarantee of this particular deal. Well, of course, many people are now finding that that's not quite as easy as they might have assumed, because this only applies for qualifying goods. And you've got to identify the goods which are actually entitled to benefit from zero tariffs, zero quotas, and that requires determining the origin of the goods. And that means that a lot of goods which are manufactured using parts or ingredients from other parts of the world still do have to pay tariffs and still will be subject to quotas. And in any case, all goods have to fill in the paperwork, the bureaucracy that goes with proving their qualifying status. Even regardless of the question of tariffs and quotas, we know that the sudden return of significant border control, significant customs bureaucracy is simply inherent in the existence of two separate customs and regulatory territories. And we're already seeing the full effects of what happens when the EU starts to enforce its rules against the UK. We haven't even yet seen what happens when the UK starts to enforce its full rules against the EU, because we're still waiting for those to be phased in. As well as the problems that we know with the border controls and the customs formalities and so on, of course, one of the biggest changes of the lot is that we're no longer members of the single market, and there is no more free movement of goods or free movement of services through the system of mutual recognition, through the system of you're regulated once in your home state, and then you have free access to the rest of Europe. That doesn't really exist anymore for goods, although once you've lawfully imported and marketed your goods in one EU country, they can then circulate around the rest of the single market, but it's completely not true for services. And potentially UK service providers, if they want to continue serving the whole of the EU market, will now have to comply with 27 different sets of national rules on the lawful provision of services by third countries. These are barriers and market closures which are going to emerge and worsen, deteriorate over time, and we haven't really seen the full effects of those yet. We know as well, of course, that there is no more free movement for either natural or legal persons, beyond very minimal rights to short-term travel. In the case of tourists and visas, that's been agreed effectively on a unilateral but reciprocal basis. In the case of certain short period defined business trips, it's actually contained in the treaty itself. But for the vast majority of cross-border purposes, UK nationals will be subject to ordinary EU and national immigration restrictions, and EU nationals will be subject to ordinary UK immigration restrictions. The plans, the hopes of millions of people have been ruined at a stroke. And of course, the combined effects of all of these losses and restrictions only multiplies for those activities and those sectors where you do have the movement of goods combined with the movement of services, combined with the movement of people. This is one of the reasons, for example, that touring musicians and touring production companies are suddenly experiencing the almost total collapse of their European touring prospects, simply because the combination of restrictions on moving goods, on moving people, on providing services are so anti-competitive that really it renders their business virtually unviable in much of the EU. Similarly, the story is no more positive when it comes to security cooperation in the fight against cross-border crime, cross-border terrorism, and so on. There is, of course, limited cooperation provided for in this agreement, but it's much more limited than we knew before. The UK will not be a member of Europol, will not be a member of Eurojust, and loses its access, or has only much more limited access, to a whole range of European intelligence and security resources. And most bizarrely of the lot, the UK government simply refused any form of structured cooperation or dialogue with the EU in the entire field of foreign security policy. Completely bizarre, totally inexplicable. Well, we know how to explain it, of course. This is the type of Brexit which was once considered as extreme, even by the most loony of the Leave campaigners in 2016. It's so extreme that not even the Farages advocated this type of Brexit, and yet it's the Brexit that we've ended up with. It's totally uncompromising form of future relationship that has simply placed ideology before the national interest, or indeed the interests of us as citizens, as businesses, as public bodies or public services. Now, I'm just going to say a few words then about an issue which is of particular importance, hasn't really gotten that much attention, but in some respects is probably one of the most significant changes in the way that the UK interacts with the EU and European standards and so on. Because so far what we said is, substantively, in terms of the actual content of this treaty, it scraps from the table. That's all it is. It scraps from the table, but otherwise it's the removal of vast numbers of rights, of freedoms, of benefits, of opportunities, replacing them with huge amounts of barriers, costs, closures, and losses. But those substantive problems are greatly magnified, hugely magnified, by the legal nature, the status, and the effects of this treaty. Now, here to explain this, it's worth remembering how the EU worked. And maybe we lived with this for so long that we just took it for granted, or we didn't really realize it, or we didn't really need to care about it. But what EU law did was give us as individuals rights. We had a right to free movement. We had a right to labour protection. We had rights to cross-border healthcare. They were rights which are directly vested in us as citizens. We could enforce them when things went wrong. We could sue public authorities which tried to breach our rights. We could bring actions against private businesses which tried to infringe our rights. But they were our rights as citizens, enforceable before the courts across Europe. This treaty is completely the opposite of that. This treaty explicitly says nobody, no citizens, no businesses have any rights under this treaty. These are purely obligations between the UK as a state and the EU as an organization, as a matter of international law. No individuals have any enforceable rights. No individuals have, or businesses have any enforceable obligations. So if things go wrong, if one party breaches what they've agreed to under this treaty, you or I can do nothing about it. Even if it ruins our business, even if it ruins our livelihood, you and I can do absolutely nothing about it. What we have to do is we have to ask the UK government to initiate an international dispute with the EU, which will lead to a system of arbitration and may ultimately then lead to the imposition of retaliatory sanctions. And we know how that system works. It means that some poor sod suddenly sees their life and business ruined because you randomly impose sanctions on another part of your partner's economy in an attempt to force them back into compliance with their treaty obligations. This is the way, the traditional way that international trade works. It's not how the EU works. The EU system is personalized, it's vested rights in individuals, it's about taming international relations and making the whole system of trade more personal and more civilized. In effect, we've had a seriously retrograde step through this treaty, because not only are all of those losses, all of the costs, all of the burdens, all of the problems, but in addition, we've simply been systematically stripped of any opportunity as citizens or businesses to protect ourselves, even under what we're meant to have under this treaty. And instead, we've gone back to a system which greatly increases the potential for international tension and for international antagonism. And we've seen that. We've seen it with Donald Trump and his trade wars with China. That's the type of relationship which this treaty is based on, not a relationship of citizenship, rights, and obligations. So the government, I suppose, wants us to see only what this agreement says, and even then only through very, very, very rose-tinted spectacles. And it wants us to ignore all of the things which this treaty takes away, which this treaty doesn't give us compared to what we had before. But I suppose in addition, and this brings me on to the final little issue that I was asked to talk about, let's not kid ourselves that this means Brexit is done. And there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, even on its own terms, this treaty is merely a framework. There are significant parts of it which are still only transitional and will have to be replaced with alternative provisions in due course. There are significant parts which are sketchy and need to be further elaborated by agreement and negotiation between the parties. The entire thing, of course, needs constant, ongoing, permanent management to be operationalized and to be interpreted. And it's due to be reviewed and potentially renewed or revised on a regular basis. And of course, this is only one treaty. And this treaty is not comprehensive. Outside the context of this treaty, there are many other issues where EU-UK relations or UK relations with the member states need also to be managed. The prime example, of course, being Northern Ireland. The entire future of Northern Ireland lies effectively outside the scope of this treaty and has to be managed separately through the provisions of the withdrawal agreement and the protocol. And of course, there are a whole range of other issues which simply need to be addressed unilaterally. We still have to sort out equivalency for financial services. We still have to sort out adequacy for data protection and a whole host of other issues as well. So is this treaty the end of the story? Of course it isn't. Of course it isn't. It's just another stepping stone on a miserable road. But besides that, of course, what Boris Johnson wants us to also forget about is the damage which has been done to the UK's position within Europe and within the world. The UK has effectively entirely sacrificed its leadership within Europe, and through it, its influence, a large part of its influence in the rest of the world. But actually, I'm afraid we have to go further than that. That was obvious. That was always going to happen. I think the thing which is even more worrying than that is the sign that actually the Brexit regime which currently governs this country has decided that its strategic interest lies in being an antagonistic power in Europe, in actually behaving like an antagonistic power vis-a-vis the EU. We already saw that, for example, in relation to the proposals to breach the withdrawal agreement under the UK Internal Market Bill, but we see it just as strikingly in the UK's absolute refusal to recognise the full diplomatic status of the EU's ambassador to the UK. This is absolutely inexplicable, other than on purely ideological grounds related to hostility towards the EU itself. And when I speak to my colleagues in various other contexts, they've started to openly describe the UK as the new Russia, a power which effectively sees it as its strategic vocation to undermine European cooperation and European solidarity. A shocking state of affairs. But this is how my colleagues across the EU are now talking about the UK as a member of the international community. And of course, that's only the external dimension. Boris Johnson also wants us to forget the deep divisions that have been created and have not been resolved within the UK itself. The divisions with Scotland and Wales, which are only looking more pressing, the segregation of Northern Ireland and the potential to destabilise the peace process, and of course the simple anger and resentment that many millions of people like me feel at the completely uncompromising approach which this government is taking, and in fact the way that they seem to delight in insulting and sidelining a very substantial part of the population that doesn't share their ideological viewpoint. And of course they want us to simply forget the spiteful and cruel treatment that they've meted out to millions of people, EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens across the rest of the EU. So there are many things which this treaty doesn't say and doesn't do, but there are equally a much wider set of problems and a much wider set of tensions which this treaty does absolutely nothing to address, and in fact that this government seems to revel in more than anything else. I think probably the most worrying thing of all for us now that we've got to live with is simply the fact that we already knew this from what we'd seen in Brexit, but it's been accelerated under the conditions of the pandemic, that this is a government which has precious little interest in parliamentary democracy. This is a government which happily treats Parliament as if it's an inconvenience. It treats opposition as if it's some form of anti-patriotic threat to the national interest. It treats dissent as if it's something to be suspicious and attacked. I mean, I used to say, and some of the people on this call might have heard me say it before, that I thought the UK was, 10 years behind Hungary or Poland, and then it slipped down to 5 years behind Hungary or Poland. Sorry, in many respects, the UK is worse than Hungary and Poland already. It's bad enough that 40% of the population are still minded to vote for a regime like Boris Johnson, but far worse is the fact that 40% of the vote is enough to get a substantial majority in the House of Commons, and with a substantial majority in the House of Commons, you have virtually unchecked constitutional power in this country. And when you're faced like a regime of the likes of Johnson, which is simply devoid of morality and devoid of any sense of political integrity, that is a deeply dangerous constitutional arrangement that we have to live under. So at 29 minutes and 30 seconds, overall then, what do I think of Johnson's deal? It's better than having my horse burnt down. It's better than being slapped in the face. It's better than having all of my belongings stolen. But compared to what we had before, it is worse than pathetic. And in any case, it does nothing to address the wider problems and challenges that we face as a post-Brexit country trying to grapple with the enormity of what's happened over the past several years. So thank you very much indeed for your attention, and I'll look forward to a few questions now before we hand over to Mike.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael, for that great expose of what's a pretty shocking government, really. There are quite a few questions popping up in the chat already, and I will invite some of you to, but there are 3 questions actually from Jonathan Buisson and Omid Mustafi and Jenny and Annette Shaw, all about Lord Frost and whether his appointment as co-chair of the EU-UK Partnership Council is a bad thing or not. Do you want to make any comments on that? You're muted. You're muted, Michael. Should be bottom left.
What was the name, Michael?
Michael Dougan. I'm asking Michael Dougan to answer that question from those.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, that's me. Sorry, I'm back again. Sorry, I think I've realised that if I press mute myself, I can't unmute myself. So sorry, I'll stop doing that. What do I think of Lord Frost's appointment? I mean, it's not the type of thing which I do. He's you know, I don't analyse people's psychology, and I'm not enormously interested in him or his life. From the little that I've seen of him, I mean, I read the public statements and the documentation which comes from these people, and that's how I evaluate them through the written word. And I have to say, I think I'd sum him up by saying there's nothing worse than a convert, is there? He comes across as someone who is so extreme on the Brexit spectrum that he's virtually unhinged. I don't think he's a constructive character. I think he has an incredible fixation on the idea of UK sovereignty, but he clearly doesn't understand what the word sovereignty means, and clearly doesn't understand how international relations actually operate in a national interest. So what do I think of him? I think he's a dangerous character, and I think it says a lot that this is the type of person that Boris Johnson, another one of his chums, that he wants to have sitting around the table with him. And I don't think it's a particularly positive development.
Thank you. Can I ask Graham Jones, who is chairman of the Oxford region, to ask his question about the Parliamentary Assembly and indeed what both of you might do to be lobbying for the new Civil Society Forum. Graham, do you want to ask your question, or have I summarised it?
Yes. Thank you, Richard. Yes, Michael. Well, and both Michaels really. I'd be very interested to hear your opinion on when we might expect the Parliamentary Assembly to be in being. I understand the President of the European Parliament has written to the Speaker, so we might have some movement, but it might take a long time. And I'm wondering what each of you is doing practically to lobby for an early start to the Civil Society Forum.
Okay. Shall I answer it? I don't think you should get your hopes up for the value of these parliamentary assemblies and civil society forums. Every means of communication is, of course, a positive one, and the more opportunities there are for people to talk to each other and reach a better understanding of their positions, the better. But these are fairly common bodies in modern EU trade agreements, but they don't have much of an influence or a role to play. They are effectively merely consultative bodies. And to be frank, they're only as good as the quality of the input that they get and the support that they get from the governments, which are then responsible for translating them into practice. To be frank, if what the Westminster Parliament ends up doing is effectively letting the likes of Bill Cash, with his sort of weirdo, the way that he's ruined the European Scrutiny Committee in many respects by simply turning it into a vehicle for himself to just express his Europhobic ideas. If we end up with a parliamentary liaison, which is effectively just made up of right-wing weirdos who want to mouth off at the EU and don't take it at all seriously, then it'd be better if it didn't exist. But I think you should have fairly limited expectations for how much power and influence and say that these bodies have. I think it's very limited. In terms of what I'm doing personally to support a civil society forum, I'm afraid that's not my job. I've got lots of things to do in the world, and I'm afraid that's just not one of the things that I'm involved in. But like I said, anything which offers the opportunity for better dialogue and understanding is a good thing, provided the people involved are willing to take it seriously. But I wouldn't get my hopes up.
Thank you. There's a question also, another question from Annette Shaw about Northern Ireland and the Republic. You talked about Northern Ireland. What's the likelihood of reunification?
Okay. So the likelihood of reunification isn't really a question that I can answer, and it's a completely speculative one. What I can do is just say that many people seem to assume that Irish reunification is somehow the natural or the best solution to the situation in Northern Ireland, and I'm afraid that's just not true. and I am an Irish Northern nationalist from Belfast. I view Irish reunification as a desirable long-term goal. But the simple fact is that the best thing that ever happened to Northern Ireland was the Good Friday Agreement. And the problem is that Brexit inherently poses a threat to the Good Friday Agreement and inherently destabilizes the conditions for the success of the Good Friday Agreement. The protocol is not ideal. From the moment that it was published, people like me have been saying this is highly problematic. It creates all sorts of tensions and problems for Northern Ireland as a society, and it creates particular problems for unionists in some respects, for nationalists in others. But it's the solution which the parties agreed on, primarily at the insistence of the Boris Johnson government. So I'm afraid we simply have to make the protocol work. The problem is that Irish unification isn't just something that you can decide you're going to do on a 51% vote, because it will only work if two main conditions are satisfied. First of all, that a substantial majority of the population in Northern Ireland are fully reconciled to the idea of Irish reunification, and that simply is not the case. And the last thing we need is for Northern Ireland to break out into a full-scale civil disorder, if not civil war, through a 51% vote in favour of unification, when a hardcore loyalists would violently oppose that option. And that's simply a reality. The Democratic Unionist Party is, by the way, a total misnomer. There's nothing democratic about them. They're one of the least democratic parties you'll ever meet. But secondly, the main condition, the other main condition is that the Republic has to be willing and able to absorb the North. The North is an expensive little place. There are very substantial differences in the two societies, in the two economies, in the two public services. And there are real questions about how you would manage the politics of Northern Ireland by absorbing it into the Republic. The Republic is a relatively happy, stable, prosperous place. If I were living in the Republic, the last thing I'd want is 2 million angry, destabilized Northerners joining my happy, stable, prosperous country without a clear plan for how to manage the situation successfully. And we're a very long way away from that. So to sum up, Irish reunification, yes, as a long-term aspiration, I fully support it. But as an immediate or short-term solution to the problems facing Northern Ireland, I think we should be very careful that we're not wishing for something that will actually cause substantially more problems than it would solve. We simply have to make this protocol work. And that means accepting its problems rather than fuming about them and fighting against them like the DUP are currently trying to do.
Thank you, Michael. There's another question in the chat column here from Jane Riekeman, who I think is from Bristol or somewhere in the southwest. Will the current problems eventually see us moving towards rejoining the single market, do you think?
Not under this government. we can be fairly sure. I mean, I think we've got to be sort of realistic about the economics and the politics of this. At the minute, we're not wanted, to be frank. We've shown ourselves to be untrustworthy and hostile and antagonistic international partners towards the EU. And so at the minute, I'll be completely honest, when I talk to any of my colleagues in any other EU country, they simply say, good riddance. Good riddance to the UK. Now, that, of course, is one of the objectives of the Brexitists. They want to make the UK seem so unpopular and so undesirable that everyone else just turns their back. And it's working pretty well, huh? But let's say, that there is a future government, a change of heart that does want to rebuild bridges and does want to go closer again. The big problem facing the UK is that if you want to be a member of the single market and you want to be a member of the customs union, it's on the EU's terms. And this is the dilemma that was highlighted throughout the entire referendum campaign. It's why, the EEA brigade, the soft Brexiteers, why I find them just as annoying as anyone else in this whole debate, because they genuinely believe that the UK can be a member of the single market and the customs union and somehow an equal player, an equal political voice to the EU itself. That's simply not the case. So what we're basically saying is the UK would join the single market and the customs union and just simply be a rule taker, would simply allow the EU to determine the rules for the UK itself. That is not politically and democratically sustainable. So it might be a stepping stone, back towards rejoining, but really the realistic option facing the UK is rejoining in due course if it doesn't want to simply be an isolated mid-ranking power in between Europe and North America and China and Brazil and India and all the rest of it.
Thank you, Michael. I must let Mike Galsworthy speak in just a moment. There are quite a lot of questions still in the chat, and we'll come back to them at the end if there's time. But Charles Bradshaw had a hand up. So if Charles could be unmuted, I'll let Charles ask his question to you, Michael, before Mike speaks to us.
Hello, thank you. Yes, it follows on from the previous question. The part I wanted to ask, have we signed anything that stops a stepping stone type reintroduction to the single market or the customs union? Apart from our antagonistic approach, have we made it more difficult for ourselves by anything that we've signed?
Not enormously, in the sense that if that's a decision which is taken by a future UK government and Parliament that the UK wants to request either close cooperation with or in effect membership of the customs union, the single market, then that's just something that needs to be negotiated and agreed with the EU, and then the necessary measures put in place, for example, by getting rid of all of those border points again and all the rest of it. But I mean, the agreement itself is there until the agreement is revised. The agreement contains its own review clauses, so it will be reviewed on a periodic basis, and there is the power to make amendments and revisions. Of course, the scale of revisions and amendments that would be required in order to rejoin the customs union in the single market are such that it would probably just involve an entirely new treaty, an entirely new set of negotiations. But there's nothing stopping us. If that's the political choice which is taken by a future government and Parliament, then that is simply a matter of negotiation and then legislation.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. Can I now invite Mike to speak? And before you actually start, can I give you one question we've already had, which is right in your area, from Alexandra Ben-Susan about EU funding for scientific research programs and how much the British government's promising to put in to replace it, and what will the effects be on research in the UK from Brexit. So I'm sure you're going to cover that, but I thought I'd just throw in Alexandra's question so you're aware of it.
Okay, yeah, I will cover that in my copious looking notes here, which I'm going to have to charge through at pace. I do have a bit on that, and if I don't cover it as thoroughly as you think I should, then I'll happily address that question at the end.
Thank you.
Right, well, good evening. Lovely to see you all here, sort of about 300 of you. Really nice to see all of your faces again. It's been a lonely time, locked away, and it's really nice to see Michael Dougan again and hear him speak. And that was fascinating to listen to. And the one big take home that I take from it, I think you should all take from it, is that Brexit isn't going away as an issue. You can see from the scrappy and messy nature of that trade and cooperation agreement that there are tons of bits missing. There are tons of bits that need to be reworked. There are tons of flashpoints in it that we could kick off about. So any notion that, you know, if we leave the EU, then we won't hear about the EU again. No, this is actually going to heighten our understandings of our relationship with our European partners and how they work. We're still on that multi-annual journey of having that education that we never had pre-2016. And everything that has gone on so far has just been almost like the foreplay to where we are now, and the more learnings that we're going to have as we try and rebuild. So that's what I want to go through now from the, if Michael has sort of like set the framework with where we are with this deal and treaty and where our relationship is now, how do we start building back with Europe along that campaigning path? So first up, I'd like to give you a little anecdote, I guess. I did my PhD in genetics, but also animal behavior. And one of the things I was doing in animal behavior was trying to design intelligence tests for mice. And with mice, or with doing intelligence tests on any animals, you have to be very careful about the motivation. There are some tests where the motivation is positive. You give them a little bit of chocolate or cheese or what have you. In other tests, the motivation is negative. You put them in water or a colder area or under bright lights, and they don't like it, and they try and get out of those areas. But the most powerful motivations is that strong place preference. We've got compound motivations. They don't like where they are, and they have a place that they really, really want to get to. I made a thing called a puzzle box where they were in this bright, sparse area, but if they squeezed in through a little tunnel, then there was a big dark area which was full of sawdust and toilet rolls and sometimes bits of food. And if you've got that kind of dynamic, where you are is crap, where you want to get to is really, really great, then animals and humans will really work and put in the effort to overcome the barriers to get there. And so that's what we need to think about now. Certainly with the whole Brexit narrative, we had years and years and years, if not decades, of right-wing press saying that the EU is horrible, it's oppressive, it's a dictator, we're in a rubbish place. And that was building up and building up in the culture. And then with their campaigning, then it came in towards the end. Think of all the liberties, think of all the freedom, think of all the trade, think of all the money coming back. So it had this strong place preference shift that meant that it had a really, long-standing pressure campaigning wise. But then it also had the structures. It had the Aaron Banks and Leave.eu, but it also had lots of people high up in government and big money, all making sure that all the campaigning structures were in the right place when there was nothing really defending the European narratives in the media or in politicians that was substantial, that could be considered, veteran structures on our side. They had key issues, which was a long shopping list of grievances. And then with timing, let's not remember that timing was easy for them, because after 1973, they were disgruntled in 1992. There was a referendum party in 1997. You had UKIP set up. And then it was only when Cameron was weak towards the end of 2014, after UKIP successes, then they actually got their mechanism that they could work upon. So that's what I want to talk now in terms of motivation, structures that we need, issues that we need, and timing that we need. Now, in terms of motivation, we're in a good place at the moment. We need to bash Brexit. We'll have ample opportunities to bash Brexit because of all the reasons of the inadequacy of the TCA. And what that means culturally, what that means for business, what that means for so many of our sectors and endeavors. We will have that constantly. We will be amply supplied with abilities to bash Brexit. That's the easy part. And we also have a mood that supports it too. Recent polling has shown that 25% of the public think that Brexit's going well versus 42% that think it's going badly. This is after just a month. If you look at the Remain and Leave constant polling that's going on, it was 49-37. Right-wrong polling on 31st of January, yes, round about then, was 48-40 on 27th of January. Then, of course, there was the mess up from the EU over Article 16, but it was still ahead at 45-43. In terms of rejoining, though, and this is getting over that motivational hump, there's still people a bit more reticent about rejoining at the moment. So they can think it was a mistake, they can think the place is crap, but the barriers may seem too high and may seem too painful at the moment for people to really have a lot of pressure at this stage to get back into the EU. And it's a fairly long journey as well. But the conditions around the mood music are in the right place for the gravity to start pulling us back to being more European, working with Europe on more issues, feeling more British European, and that even in people who voted Leave and people who are Conservatives, a lot of them will still say, or a proportion of them, a decent proportion, will still say that they're British European, which is very interesting. So working on all that cultural mood music is going to be very important. And I'll come on to that in a bit. So that's the mood music, that's the positive and the negative. Now let's talk about the structures that we need. There are different types of campaigns, and to pull off what we want to pull off in terms of where we want to go, you need it at the grassroots ground level, the mid-level, and the top level. There are a lot of campaigns, in fact, most campaigns operate in the sort of mid-level. They do petitions once in a while on the national level. They have some MPs that they can talk to. They have some issues they can push or reports they can write. And once in a while, they'll be able to get one of their spokespeople on TV or radio. Okay, that's mid-level. Not a lot of them have the ground level where you've actually got a woven structure right throughout the geography of the country that can operate in localities with the local news, building with the local communities, interacting with local journalists, gathering money, sending out flyers locally. Not a lot of campaigns overall have the structure to do that, but we're absolutely going to need to do that. And I'll come back to that in a bit, because obviously that's where you come in. And then within structures overall, you need that top level of working too. And basically that means working amongst the parliamentary structures, having very close relationships with MPs to the degree whereby they will, you know, come to you because they know that you're an engine that can get things done. It is being able to put people on TV or radio more regularly, lead a lot of media output, get the big donors, use the big databases, and in our particular case, also have the international liaison across the EU. So we need all of those levels to be healthy and functional. Now, what happens now in terms of the Brexit bashing bit? So this is roles of the structures now. In terms of all the Brexit bashing bit, that's what we all like to do, and that's the easy bit. But to be blunt, The Guardian, The Independent, The Financial Times, The Economist, and lots of other publications will do that for us for free. Their intellectual curiosity will take care of this for us. They are going to be that campaigning force. All they require from us is that we use this veteran homegrown community that we've developed over the last years to just magnify it on social media, turn it into a few petitions to our local MPs and up the chain. That's all we need to do there. But that's actually pretty lightweight work. And the danger is that we all get stuck on social media just doing that. Now, sure, we can hunt out some of the local Brexit damage and feed it into our local newspapers. And this is partly why we've got the bylines network set up of local papers. But what we really, really need from our own community is the grass is greener narratives. We need, because that's not what The Guardian, The Independent, Financial Times, and Economist are going to do for us. The BBC is not going to do that. Sky News isn't going to do that. They're not going to set out the pathfinding visions about, we want to talk about who in Europe is doing the transport right, you know, the food, the culture, the holidays, the personal stories of exchanges, of common heritage, of the importance of bringing in those cultural bonds from Europe to us. All of this kind of like, we are British European, look how well things are going on in Europe. That's not going to come naturally, but that's where we need to put in the work, especially pairings between localities, because that is the fuel for that identity resurgence in that mood music that helps gravitationally pull us closer and want to make more of those cultural links and want to make more of those business partnerships and want to celebrate more of those science and health and climate change collaborations. So that's the work that needs to be done. And this is where the Bylines network that we set up is particularly useful, because it is our ability to get those kind of stories and narratives rolling, and then also rolling on a local level. Because the problem is with mid-level campaigns, they can talk to national newspapers or they can talk amongst themselves, but when do they actually do the work talking locally to the communities that they need to get through? That's where the really hard work happens. And you need the local journalism to do that in partnership with local campaigns and local events when events can be back on. So that's the structural dynamic and how it works with the mood music. So the take home from that, if you will, is please try to dedicate some time away from the Brexit disaster porn, because it's very easy to get sucked into that, and actually try and spend time thinking about developing the strong, positive, future-focused narratives, because we're going to need lots of that. And I find it myself, it's very easy to sit on social media and just amplify the Brexit disaster stuff, but we can get stuck in that rut. So we actually need to have a really structured program about how we identify and bring out all the positive stories. And that cuts across lots of issues. So on to issues. With science, that is a big issue of collaboration. Everyone supports the notion of collaboration. Fortunately, our role on the Horizon Europe programme has been spared. We are pretty much full members of that, with a degree of policy voice as well. We don't have a vote, but we're allowed to be in the room, and our scientists will be taken seriously, and our experts will be heard at all levels of European science in all of those processes. And so that's important, because that's our most vital bond that has been spared the chop, if you will. However, because of Brexit carnage over the last few years, with all the uncertainty about where we were going to go on this programme, we have dropped from joint first place with Germany, which we held for a good decade, down to about 5th, behind Germany, France, Italy and Spain, and just above the Netherlands for our participation levels and money earned on the Horizon 2020 programme. And that also meant that we've lost approximately £1.5 billion from what we would have got if we'd kept up at the same levels as Germany. So we've got a lot of rebuilding to do there with Europe, rebuilding the trust there in order to win back that level of participation, and with it all the money, the networks, the lead author publications, leading up global collaborations and so forth and so on. We've also, of course, lost the EMA, we've lost a role on Galileo, we've lost various other bits and pieces of structure, but this is the thing we need to rebuild. And so the issue in science is we have a government now that is saying that they want a vision of being pro-science and regulatory innovation in science. And now that we've got our Brexit freedoms, we can be a regulation innovator, and that's the mission. Problem being that this regulation innovation stuff doesn't come from the science community. This comes from Conservative Party Eurosceptic fantasy, looking for reasons to be able to crow about freedoms and stuff. What the risk is here is that in areas like artificial intelligence and all the rest, you want global standards, and you want the UK, the EU and the US to be lined up on those and reassuring our publics that we're all going to be responsible together on that, on technologies that cross borders, whether it be health security, health data, re-identification, deep fakes and other fake content. You know, that is something that we need on a global Western level at the very least. But in those areas where the UK may get ahead of EU regulation, for example, stem cell research, where there are some more Catholic countries, should we say, across the rest of Europe that may be resistant to it, you do not want antagonism between the UK and the EU over such issues. It's bad for our collaboration. It's bad for public trust in science. Rather, what you need is a partnership whereby the UK can be a test bed, maybe on some new issues. And that would be the sensible, smart, and mutually beneficial way to do it. So that's science, and that's where we have to champion the collaboration. And that's where I'm going to be working damn hard on defeating that narrative and working to build the pro-European narrative. And also there's a lot that the UK can build within the European structures that nicely complements what the EU has been doing. On Erasmus Plus, we've lost it. We're not going to get back our role on that. But the important thing is, not in a hurry. The important thing is that the Turing scheme is only about sending our students out, and it misses, therefore, the about 30,000 students and workers that otherwise would have coming from the rest of Europe to the UK. It's not just an EU thing, it's a European-wide thing. So we can keep talking about the loss there and saying we're not attracting the best and the brightest to our shores. We're missing out on all those exchanges. If we're not going to do Erasmus, well, let's see if we can participate in bits of it. We'll get some replacements. But that's something that we can bang on about without expecting a full Erasmus thing for various dynamics. Northern Ireland, like science, is another bridge that we have with the EU. It's a frustration to Brexiteers that we've got part of the UK actually in the single market and customs union. And if Northern Ireland does particularly well from that, then that is something whereby we've got one foot constantly in the single market and customs union, which is interesting. So if everything goes well there, then that makes it easier to start easing back in. If we can talk about Northern Ireland used to be in a bit of a state economically, but look at what they're attracting in now. That's an interesting one to watch. On security, definitely we need to rebuild that, and that's going to be a big issue with the Conservatives. So that is very important that we start getting Conservative support for rebuilding with Europe back on board. I'll come on to why later, but in brief, it's like what Michael was saying just before, which is Europe is not going to accept us while they think that we're being dicks, or even if one party is extremely antagonistic towards Europe, then they don't want to take the risk of it being a party political thing that changes from election to election, or we're in, out, shake it all about kind of thing. So it's very, very important that we associate Brexit with the Boris Johnson faction of the Conservative Party and not the Tories overall. I know this hurts, but if we're being pragmatic and forward-looking, that's how we need to start badging it. So security is a big thing, and it's a big thing for Tories. Also, with business partnerships, we need to work on that and tell all the positive stories about those collaborations and things that we've built together. And then, of course, citizens. Our citizens and their rights in Europe, European citizens or non-British European citizens and their rights in the UK. We want their artists, we want their talent, we want their scientists, we want their shows, we want to give them our artists, our shows, our scientists. We want that free exchange, and this government is letting us down on that free exchange. Those are the sort of key set of issues that we can be going like, these are our partners, we're British European, we want more. This is the brick by brick, stepping stone by stepping stone, things that we can argue for. Now, what's the timing of all of this? And this is where it actually gets most difficult, because the main timing points are, well, we've got local elections, Holyrood elections coming up in May. That one's going to feature Brexit very heavily, but we probably want to amplify some Brexit stories, but there's nothing agenda-wise that we're likely to be able to get change there. The next big thing, of course, is 2024, the national elections. After that, there's a sort of, we have to revisit the TCA, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, in 2026. And with regards to Scottish independence, well, we'll have to see what comes out following May. But if that ever lands in the diary, then that is actually a massive pressure point on this government to make sort of key concessions, not just about devolution, but also some of our relationship with Europe issues. All of which means that for the little sort of victories and gains that we want to get on certain issues, there's no clear framework for this. I mean, sure, we'd like Labour to be gunning at this stage fully anti-Brexit. They won't. But that's not such a big issue because, again, like I was saying before, we don't want to make it two-party political at this stage. We don't want Labour to be pro-EU and the Tories strictly pro-European and the Tories strictly anti-European. We want, in many cases, to have our campaigns leading on that issue, but then forcing it so that we don't let the issue go to sleep, so that if we do defeat the current Conservative Party in 2024, Brexit and the fallout of Brexit is one of those clear issues, and the winning party or the winning coalition has to acknowledge that and work on that. So this is a tricky one to work with. I mean, what we have been doing with March for Change is building up that campaigning capacity at the cross-party level. Alongside Best for Britain and others, of course, we'll be nudging for a revision to, our democratic system and how that might be the basis of a progressive collaboration going into 2024. But we're also thinking that because Labour can't gun on some of these issues that we really care about, we're going to need to first. And even if with things like we've done today, which was all over the BBC about us demanding that frontline NHS staff who have long COVID have it treated as an occupational disease and have that treated as such, we've said, because the EU have mandated this through a directive. France, Germany, Spain, Denmark, they've all recognized long COVID as an occupational thing. We're lagging Europe on this. Europe's gotten ahead on this. So that grass is greener thing that we try and nudge into a lot of what we do is going to be important as well. But we need to build those structures at that top level because we can't rely on Labour at this stage. And we're going to have to do a lot of that campaigning ourselves. And we're going to have to make sure that it's very, very cross-party. And I think I'll broadly wrap it up there, apart from two more things that I want to say. And one is, we should always be mindful of threats coming down the line, and they will always be if the EU messes up on stuff, or if there are clear bust-ups between the UK and the EU, like we've seen over the Article 16 stuff. That does give a knock to some of the polling. Best thing to do is to, acknowledge it and, call out the EU like we have before. I think as a community, we handled that quite maturely, and then those narratives settle down, and then it'll be okay. But we should really, really stay away from this notion that the EU is good and the UK is bad. The more we do that, the more we get stuck in a rut that's going to be very, very unhelpful. What we want is we want the EU to do really well, and we want the UK to do really well for exactly the reason that Michael was saying before. We need to be a confident, healthy, successful country, confident in our own skins, that the EU would want to invite back into their fold, and confident enough in ourselves that we actually want to go back into Europe as a responsible country, not looking to get ahead of the other nations or undermine them, but actually saying, no, we're on the same level as the US or Germany. We can shoulder responsibilities. We can invest in other countries. We can take on burdens. We're actually big boys now, big girls, we're a mature, responsible nation. And I think, and Tony Blair actually put this very well, that we want the UK to do well, because any future partnership or coming together between the UK and the EU needs to be done on that level of maturity where culturally we all feel very confident about this. And so that's the kind of narrative that we also need to knock back with the Brexiteers. No, I want my country to do well so that we've got a better chance of getting back into the EU, should be the way we're thinking about it all. Okay, and I'll wrap it up there, and feel free to fire questions at me.
Thank you, Mike. We've got a lot of questions in the chat and 3 hands up as well. I'm just going to pick up what you were just saying there about getting back into the EU, because John Burt in Shropshire has asked what level of support from the British public would be necessary for the EU to consider it. And Joe Henshaw in Hereford has picked up on that too, saying how long do you think we might have to wait? When would they contemplate having us back again? Do you want to deal with that sort of pair of questions?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't be waiting and twiddling our thumbs. I think we should be rebuilding, and a lot of that rebuilding, as I keep saying, is actually the mood music. So looking at all those, polls that we care about public sentiment, thinking how we can chip away at that, thinking about that identity, that national identity, mature, responsible, British European kind of thing. And the thing that's going to change it for the EU is when they see the tone of our government changing and the tone of the Conservative Party changing. And so that's what we need to be focused on. It's not going to be a percentage in the public. It's going to be that tone change from both Labour wanting to talk about it, but most importantly, the Conservative Party and that toxicity draining away. So if we're really smart, that's got to be the focus of our sort of like endeavour here. Thinking about the issues that were, because I'm seeing some commentary in the Spectator now saying, well, looking at recent from James Forsyth, the UK and the EU should be good friends. Sure, the EU got a bit rattled when they saw our success with our vaccines, but they really shouldn't, and they really shouldn't be punishing us like they should. So they've still got this, wanting to have a dig, but they're also realizing that basically this country is quite screwed if it can't get on with the entirety of its own neighborhood. So there will be that building pressure, and we need to help craft, that amicable environment. We need to swallow back a lot of words at times in that, but that's where our focus should be, because necessity is going to drive us there, and we shouldn't mess that up. We should actually work on it in clever ways.
Thank you very much. You touched on vaccines there, and there was a question earlier from Ellen Greco about whether the slow EU rollout of vaccines was a criticism that, how would we answer that criticism of the EU on that? But Mark Webster gave a bit of an answer there. I don't know whether Ellen is happy with what Mark suggested, or Ellen, do you want to ask anything more about the vaccines question? Is Ellen Greco around?
I mean, I can address it anyway.
Right, please.
I mean, as we all know, we did that approval while still in EU structures officially, using a clause or a provision that goes back quite some time. And Hungary wanted to use the same one to approve the Sputnik vaccine, and was given by permission by the Commission to do so. For me, the sad thing here is that when the European Medicines Agency left London, it left its pairing with the MHRA, which is excellent. They were both excellent. They were both in London with EMA with 900 staff and 40,000 business visits per annum, and an annual budget of over 300 million. And they lost staff when they left from London to Amsterdam, just a year and a bit back. So it sort of disempowered the EMA a little bit. And so all of this kind of like, MHRA did it before EMA. Well, EMA started analysing it before the MHRA. They were more careful. But if you think if the EMA were back in London, if we were still in the EU, we would have probably had it out faster, not just, well, for all of the, for the EU, and we would have been, quite heroes on that level. So I think that's quite sad that instead of a mutual win, because remember, we can't fully open up our economy until Europe and some other parts of the world are sort of fixed too. We have this sort of divisive aspect. With the rollout, we've done very, very well on the rollout, and our NHS has done well on the rollout, and the government planned it well. Across the EU, that's a national competence, so it's down to the individual governments. There has been funny business with AstraZeneca because the EU did actually sign a contract first, but then the UK paid more, and I think probably engaged in some arm twisting. But then actually overall, the big picture is that the UK, the US, the EU countries, Israel, Bahrain, and a few others are just well ahead of the game. Australia and New Zealand haven't started yet. Canada's lagging. But that's all the Western world, because I mean, we'll all get over the finish line this year for the critical coverage that we need to happen. And then the big challenge is we'll all need to work together to try and chase down those variants and do the vaccinations in the rest of the world. Now, the EU have ordered 4 times more doses than they needed. The UK has ordered 5.5 times more doses than we needed. Canada has ordered 9 times more doses than they need. So all of us will have to be thinking about how we give our spare vaccines out to the rest of the world and get it to remote parts of South America, where they will be at the moment cooking up new variants. And that's what we're going to have to deal with collectively. But the thing that saddens me, oh God, I've been prattling for so long about this issue, but it's important. The thing that saddens me is that everyone thinks about how does the UK do compared to the EU on this metric of the vaccination stuff, instead of thinking that if we were in the EU, there wouldn't have been a bust up like we've had. And if the EU had been 27 different countries, think about the chaos that would have ensued there as the UK, Germany, France all sucked up all the vaccinations for themselves early, leaving all the smaller countries to be breeding grounds of coronavirus, who have to then shut down their economies and see their economies start tanking. So the EU has gone slower than the UK because they've got more responsibilities on. They're taking care of 27 different countries, making sure that it is fair and just and balanced. So they've taken on a lot more responsibility. We've just been selfish and taken care of ourselves and gone, ha ha. But at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to open up fully until they're sorted too. So who's the winner here?
Thank you. Andy Roberts has had his hand up for a little while, but his question was really for Michael Dougan, so I'm going to bring you in a moment, Andy. Before that, there was a question from Steve, I don't know what his surname was, about if the UK is a member of the European Standards Organization, is there a real risk of divergence of technical standards?
I think in general terms with divergence, the practical drive for it is near zero. Generally speaking, when you get 28 countries coming together and agreeing on a certain standard, especially when they're European countries, it's usually pretty good. And the UK has broadly been, a fan of all the standards that we've set collectively. So the practical drive on divergence on standards is very, very, very small. So it's only really political juice from the ardent Eurosceptic Brexiteers that want to find divergence for the sake of divergence. And they're actively going around innovation and higher education establishments at the moment, and businesses, begging for, like, what can we do with our new freedoms? And it's kind of like, well, like we told you in 2015, 16 and 17, nothing, we want to stay aligned. And that's driving them mad. But there's a further pressure not to diverge, and that is something signed by this government itself in the TCA. It's riddled with clauses that say if we ever diverge at all, if there's an competitive economic benefit to that, then the EU have rights to put on tariffs that are compensatory in terms of money. So if we want to diverge on anything, we can ask our government, so why do we want to diverge on this? And they can't say, because it gives us a competitive advantage, because as soon as they say that, the EU can say, well, we'll see that competitive advantage, we'll add it up cost-wise, and then we'll take it straight away. So they can't say that it's a competitive advantage, and then how are they going to sell it to us? They've got themselves in the most ridiculous bind on divergence.
Thank you. And a question from Peter Burke on mutual recognition of qualifications. What's the chance of change on that, do you think?
Ooh, I mean, again, this is one of the big things where the deal, we've absolutely shafted ourselves, because we ensured no tariffs on goods, which benefits the EU because they send more to us. But in terms of services, we didn't seal that up for the deal. So basically, it's something that the EU can straight up blackmail us with. And there's a whole arms list of different conditions for different countries. And so we may have to try and pick things off at that level. But essentially, for all of that to happen, we're going to have to be on good terms with the EU and on good terms with those individual countries. So the potential for, I don't want to say blackmail, but let's say strong leverage by the EU and the European countries is really, really there. So I don't know when this is going to get approved, but you can bet your bottom butt that this is going to be on terms that are of advantage to the European countries.
Thank you very much indeed. It's time to bring Michael Dougan back into this as well and have questions to both of you. And that's where I'm going to start with Andy Roberts, because he had a question which was more geared for Michael, I think, than for Mike. Andy, can you unmute? Peter will need to, no, there we go.
You got me now? Okay. All right, simplest way I can ask the question is, to what degree should we focus on the bigger constitutional issues and political issues versus trying to reverse Brexit either by stealth through single market and so on, or completely? I mean, to give a bit of background of that, ever since 2016, I've been moving further and further away from, oh, we've got to fix Brexit, to hang on, we've got some really big problems with the press and the way politicians misbehave and the electoral system. And I'm just thinking, you know, we probably need to think about both those things, not one to the exclusion of the other, but what's the balance? What should we be thinking about?
Thanks, Andy. I think it's the big question. That is the question, and every other question is just a different way of asking that, or a different way of focusing on it. And the answer is we have to do both, and we have to do both simultaneously, and both with equal energy, enthusiasm, and ultimately success. I mean, the reality is, and many of us have said this many times, that Brexit was never an end in itself for many of the main people behind it. It was merely a means to a further end. Many of the leading Brexit supporters are simply not subscribers to the European model of liberal social market democracy. And whatever one bit of those they don't like, the liberal bit, the democratic bit, the social market bit, whatever it is they don't like, they don't subscribe to the European model of social market, liberal social market democracy. And they want to change it. And they want to stop the UK being a European-style liberal social market democracy. Now, on its face, of course, they're triumphant. They've gotten the UK out of the EU, and the path is now open for them to completely dismantle the bits of liberal social market democracy that they don't like. And that means that we do have to confront both of these changes simultaneously. If we want to have a close relationship with Europe, and if we want to rejoin the EU ultimately, we need the UK to be a European country with a European liberal social market democracy. But equally, I suspect most of us do not want to live under the type of regime that we see in Russia, or indeed in America, for all its strengths as well. It's just not, it's not our civilization, and it's not what we want. Good for them if that's what they want, but it's not what we want. So it is a simultaneous challenge. I think there's two important things that we should probably point out that I think many of the ardent Brexitists just didn't bank on. However stupid it may seem to us, you know, ideology is a very dangerous thing, and it can blind people to some of the most obvious points that human beings who actually engage with reality are capable of seeing very clearly. The first thing is, of course, that they really thought that Brexit was going to be some gigantic success. And inherently, Brexit is not going to be a success judged by their own standards. So it means that the whole narrative that they have got to sell their Brexit on is effectively about the enemy, hostility, sovereignty. The EU is trying to get us the silly comparisons with vaccinations and so on, you know, all this vaccine nationalism. But basically, Brexit is not going to be the gigantic success that they said it would be. So they've got to reinvent it as a triumph of poor little Britain against the evil Brussels and all the rest of it. But of course, the second and probably the more important bit is they genuinely believed that they were in the vanguard of some huge international movement that was going to sweep away the EU, that was going to sweep away, you know, what they see as these social market regulated economies that hold back capitalism, that was going to sweep away all of the tedious liberals who worry about minority rights and all the rest of it. And of course, that hasn't happened, quite the opposite. With Biden's election in America, however fragile things still may be there for the foreseeable future, still Trump is out, and thank Christ for it. But equally, across much of the rest of the world, there hasn't been this domino effect where Brexit Britain has led the way for the collapse of liberal social market democracy in Europe or elsewhere. And that means that Britain's looking a bit isolated at the minute, and their great international movement is actually looking like a bit of a backward and isolationist phenomenon. They didn't bank on those two things. And I think in many respects, they're two of the issues that we need to take advantage of in terms of highlighting the dangers of this particular project. But anyway, I'm digressing a bit. The answer is we need to do both. And it's tiring, it's exhausting, it's worrying, it's depressing, but we don't have any choice. We just have to do it.
Thank you, Michael. Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that was a beautiful summary, so I don't think I need to.
That's great, thank you. Vivek Sharma had his hand up some time ago, but he's taken it down now, so perhaps his question has been answered. Harriet's had her hand up a long time. And if it's the question that I think you're going to ask, Harriet, it's the same, it's a very similar question to one that John Hill from the Cotswolds has also asked in the chat column to me. So Harriet, ask away.
Right. Yes, mine's on the rejoin effort. There appears to be an increasing number of disparate pro-EU groups. This is good, but it does risk disunity in our efforts to eventually rejoin the EU. Is an alliance the way forward? And if so, what part can the European movement and Grassroots for Europe play in bringing it about?
And Richard Wilson may want to come in on that answer too, because he's, as I said, before he joined the room, he's recently been re-elected chair of Grassroots for Europe. So, but Michael and Mike first. Any comments?
I think at the moment that's really not too much of an issue because there are so many different parts of the world. So what I've been trying to do, or myself and Tom Buffett have been trying to do with March for Change, is really set up a platform that can that has capacity to help lots of different campaigning efforts. So we have it at the coronavirus, and from that, Best for Britain, you know, took our model and we worked with them closely on it. So they've got an all-party parliamentary group on gaps and support as well. So we've been working together at that level in order to be constantly working with MPs and be able to drive a lot of media narrative. I mean, we're getting out more than one piece a day, and today we've had probably a couple of dozen pieces. So getting that experience there and that strength there. At the same time, we've got the Bylines Network going, which you know what it does. It builds up that regional journalism. We've got a professional working on it now with SEO capacity, opening up the bandwidth, thinking about getting registered on news sites so that we've got that local journalism. And then because we had the capacity that we did, we could back Save British Farming and drive a lot of those demos there, which get under the skin. And then we've moved NHS for a People's Vote. That was previously Healthier In. It's now People's NHS. We're putting that in the March for Change camp to help drive a lot of the public health and science sort of related stuff there. So it's all been for me about capacity building, and that doesn't need to have any direct collaborations with any other campaigns. You know, it's just getting so many things in place for us all to use. With Scientists for EU, that's a very, very targeted mission. with Best for Britain, they've got their own mission. I mean, at the moment, just staying in touch and all working together as part of the same ecosystem. And again, some of you might have seen me on Byline TV. We're working with Byline to build up that Byline TV, entity and get our own sort of media going there. And that in turn is working with the London Economic. So it is not about formalized alliances per se, but it's more about everyone staying in touch and helping develop the whole ecosystem that we need in order to be able to shift the mood music as a whole and do lots of little campaign initiatives.
Thank you. Richard Wilson, would you like to add anything to that?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we're very conscious indeed of this in Grassroots for Europe, and we think about it a lot, the fact that there are different organisations, but I think the view is that a dynamic pro-EU movement with various components to it is a positive thing. And last night, for example, and we've been doing this weekly, we had another open forum where we had about 65 people on, and absolutely buzzing with ideas and initiatives coming from grassroots groups. And I just see that as an extremely positive thing, and it supports the overall dynamism of the movement, and it also supports the European movement itself. So we actually, by stimulating and creating that dynamism in the pro-EU movement, we are supporting the European movement organisation. The main initiative we have done for unity around the pro-EU movement has been the formation of the Round Table, which some of you may have heard of, where we are gathering together every month all the pro-EU organisations at national level to have a really good line of communication between them. And Mike has been there, Naomi Smith from Best from Britain has been there, European Movement are there every time, and Pro-Europa, the 3 million, and so on. So we're very conscious of it, as I say. We would certainly encourage Mike and March for Change and Best for Britain to keep coming to that, as well as European Movement and all the other major national pro-EU.
Yeah, totally. They've been really useful, those roundtables, and also they've had some great guests in, and so that has been another complementary sort of piece of the puzzle and part of the overall very fluid structure. And it's the fluidity that I like, that I think is natural and organic, rather than some of the rigidity problems that we had under PV. So I think the ecosystem that has evolved over years has actually found more of a harmonious state at the moment than it has in previous times, when there are just far too many power dynamics and rigid structures going on.
I think, sorry, just to come back, I think at grassroots level since 2016, the sort of plethora of different groups and organisations has generally created quite a lot of energy and dynamism, and it's built the movement that we have now, rather than having a single monolithic organisation that is, it's a calculation, but in my view, and in the view of a lot of people, having that ecosystem is actually positive for the movement, and it has proven to be so far.
Thank you both very much. I'm conscious of the fact that it's now already 5 minutes after I was hoping to conclude this, and we've got 2 more things to do, but there are still 4 hands up. Michael and Mike, are you happy to stay a little bit longer if I ask? Are you happy to stay a little bit longer?
Yes.
Can I ask Anna Granger, James Mackay, Dave Underwood, and Jill Hanna in that order, just to say very briefly what your questions are? They may be completely all sorts of different things, but if we get the 4 questions out, and then Michael and Mike to see what you can on those questions, please. So Anna first.
Hi there. I'm a modern language teacher, and what you were talking about Erasmus and Turing, and one of the things that sort of is the hidden gem of Erasmus was e-twinning, which allowed children aged 3 to 18 in schools to link up with schools across Europe and to do projects together. And we were sort of partway through projects this year, and we got locked out on the 1st of January. So my question really is, how do we sort of keep children feeling European? How do we keep them in contact with other children across Europe in the meantime? We are sort of launching a campaign, hopefully, to try and get back into e-twinning. But in the meantime, how do we go about making sure that our children, our younger children who are not covered by Turing, don't lose out?
Thank you. Could I ask James what his question is?
My question connects very well from Anna's. It took something like 25 years for attitude change from the late 40s to the 70s and from the very end of the 80s until the 2010s before the pendulum swung in each direction. For those of us who probably might not be around in 25 years' time, do we have to move to Scotland, or is there a faster way of getting that attitude change? And I think Anna may have got it already. Well, that's half the answer. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Mine's perhaps a more trivial question, but I think it is something that is causing some of us in the Herefordshire for Europe group a little bit of puzzlement. Mike used the phrase at one point, brick by brick, and that's become quite a popular phrase in the European movement. But we sort of see brick by brick as building a wall, and the last one of those was the Berlin Wall and wasn't very helpful to cooperation. Shouldn't we be talking more about building bridges and connecting? I wasn't aware, although I'm an ex-commission official, I wasn't aware of Anna's very interesting form of Erasmus. That seems to me like the sort of thing people should be writing to their local newspaper all over the country and saying this is a bridge that has gone and one we want back.
Thank you, Jill. Michael or Mike, who would like to go first on that thing about e-twinning and building bridges?
I'm happy to talk about Erasmus in particular. One of the sad things was that this year, Erasmus has expanded a lot in order to make it more accessible to people who it wasn't accessible to before, including lots of work exchanges and opening up to people who are disabled, providing advantages there. So there was a lot of accessibility associated with that budget increase. And I think it was the budget increase that spooked our government. And then they had a look at the breakdown of Erasmus and were like, oh, well, you know, if we're going to be in a money saving mode, well, why should we be spending money allowing them to come over here? You know, is that kind of like mean-spirited take on it? But they threw out so many babies with the bathwater of what they were aiming at doing. And so I didn't know this thing about, you know, kids at such a young age, but I know that Erasmus has got lots and lots and lots of parts to it. And this was built up, you know, there were lots of Brits who actually helped design it. And this was built up as cultural exchange with lots of different working parts over a long time. So there has been tons that has been trashed here. And to think that you're going to throw together an equivalent scheme in just a year and it's going to work at first pass, it's like, come on, it's ridiculous. It is, as Nicola Sturgeon said, cultural vandalism. And I think we should actually be highlighting more parts of that. We probably shouldn't be phrasing it in terms of how do we keep our kids feeling British European as we're trying to, you know, sell this to conservatives. But I think clearly there's the whole notion of enrichment of our children in terms of understanding the worlds around them. I remember when I was little and went on exchange in Germany, I was like blown away by the kind of like, what's all this? And, you know, so I think targeting the mean-spiritedness of accessing this, targeting, you know, public awareness raising about all the different lines that have been lost. And then the question, what are you going to do? You've culturally deprived us. What are you going to do about it? And like the comment was just then, you know, get this in local newspapers and get this going at a local level, pressure on the MPs, local newspapers, etc. I think with cultural changes, yes, you can either leave the country or you can get to work on it, and you probably get the most soul satisfaction if you're working on a little community. For me, it's science, or if you're working in a locality where you and a team of others have got, a bite-sized piece that you can work on. If you're looking at the national level of things, you'll just get yourself depressed. So an issue, target audience, make that yours. That's what you're working on.
Michael, do you want to add anything to that? I'm sorry, I'm muted.
Only a small point, and it's one which I've already made in the chat, so I won't labor it. I think there is also a really important question about social equality and issues around this whole question of Erasmus, and equally things like the e-twinning, which I wasn't aware of at all. Not everyone can afford to go and live abroad, and it's not just about the money, it's also about the confidence, the education, the social skills. For a lot of deprived kids in this country, the opportunity of free movement, whether it's free movement that's been lost for all of us or free movement through something like Erasmus, what wasn't a particularly feasible option. And their international experience, if you like, often came from meeting and mixing with the Europeans who came here. And I know at the University of Liverpool, this is one of our really serious worries. We're constantly told that one of the factors holding back the north of England economically and socially is the lack of a sort of international perspective, which is often just taken for granted in a lot of the wealthier towns across the country, but is one of the things which has been identified as a serious issue in the north of England. Is how do we get our kids to think internationally? How do we get to build up their confidence and their ability to sort of go out and be successful and feel entitled to be successful in life? And the problem is that it's much more difficult to do that just because of financial and mobility barriers. And that's why for us, Erasmus was so important. It wasn't because we sent out huge numbers of Liverpool students to go to France or Germany. It's because we had significant numbers of French and German and Czech and Swedish and Spanish coming to Liverpool. And for many of our students, that was their international experience. And that's where they learned about the world. And that's how they grew in confidence about other perspectives, other cultures. And so in many respects, something like the e-twinning, I think, has a bit of a resonance to me, because it's not just about the people who move, it's about the opportunities for the people who can't move, whether it's through age or whether it's through financial or social inequalities. So I think it's a really sad and very important thing to highlight as well, obviously.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, there are lots of other comments and even some questions in the chat column, which I'm afraid we can't address now. I'm going to ask Dave to ask his question in just a moment, but the event is being recorded and the chat column will be saved. So we'll have a look at that afterwards and see if there's anything that we think needs further attention by our speakers, if I can come back to Michael and Mike on that. Dave, would you like to ask your question quickly, please?
Yes, thank you. It's a question for Mike Galsworthy. He said in his talk that when he was testing his mice, he sort of offered him a better place to get to, and that the right-wing press did the same in regards to Brexit. Because we've got the press doing a lot of Brexit bashing for us, that we should offer the better place to get to. What I want to know is there any particular resources he uses for us to find this information out so we can react as and when we need to?
I think when you're going hunting for those sort of little bits of gold, you're trying to sort of uncover things that other people haven't sort of brought to light yet. And one of the best ways to do that is to pick an issue that you really care about, and then start reading around it and see what different countries have done on it. I mean, for me, I care about animal welfare and animal cruelty issues and all that kind of stuff. And it was in the Lisbon Treaty that it first made strong statements about animals as sentient beings and all the protections that naturally flow from that. When it comes to seal hunting and seal fur, it was at the EU level that we really put strong pressure on Norway and other countries in order to keep out a lot of products and keep down a lot of practices. So you don't come across those things randomly. You come across those things by picking issues that you care about, researching them, researching what's been done at European and EU levels, then building up narratives around it. I think our common cultural heritage across Europe and all of those traditional stories there about, whether it's how our kings and queens have interacted down the past, there's lovely stories to be had there that also nurture that that sense of European history and what a common pathway of our countries has been. So it's basically whatever issue absolutely sort of like fascinates you as an important thing. Climate change, how to take care of your environment, rewilding. There we go. There's another example where you've got lots of rewilding issues right across the European Union and in different countries. Some of them far in advance of what anything we've done in the UK. So hunt those out, tell those stories, and then people think, yeah, I really like the idea of, the rewilding that we've seen in the forests of Germany and Slovenia, and reintroduction of animals, and how different cities have planted sort of meadow flowers in order to bring back bees, and talk about those examples. So I think that's how I would approach it.
Thank you very much indeed. So I think we need to just conclude now.